U.S. President Trump stated that some of the 20 Israeli hostages held in the Gaza Strip may not be alive anymore. This comes days after Hamas gave a positive response to the latest proposed hostage deal. Fighting in the Gaza Strip continued to intensify over the past week. Massive airstrikes and gun battles were reported in northern Gaza and in the areas of Khan Yunis. On the humanitarian front, the United Nations has criticized Israel for not allowing more food into Gaza despite the recent increases, and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation announced a new plan to distribute aid in Gaza, involving Palestinians registering and possibly receiving ID cards. You're watching the Israel-Palestine Report with Professor Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Monday, August 18th, Hamas gave a positive response to the latest proposed hostage deal that was initiated by Qatar and Egypt. Now, there's been a lot of ambiguity about what this deal includes and what each side might agree to, what Hamas has agreed to, and what is now being proposed to Israel. So I'm going to start from a rundown of how we got to this proposal before turning to what we know about this proposal and what has been Israel's response. Before I continue, I'll remind everyone, hit that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date on all the latest developments in the war and in the Israel-Palestine arena more broadly. So, what did Hamas agree to and where do things stand? As a reminder, the talks between the sides broke down at the end of July, almost a month ago, when Israel and the United States both walked out of the negotiations that were happening in Qatar. This came after Hamas gave a response to the latest proposals that Israel and the United States said constitutes a step back and effectively ended negotiations. The main points of controversy between the sides back then were the extent of the IDF's redeployment and perimeter in Gaza, i.e., to what positions will the Israeli military withdraw during the truce, the mechanism for distributing humanitarian aid in Gaza during the truce, the amount of Palestinian prisoners that will be released in exchange for each Israeli hostage, and, possibly most important, whether or not the truce would automatically be extended to a complete ceasefire and an end to the war between the sides. Since that breakdown, Israel has changed its position on only negotiating partial truces that would allow for a return to fighting after a first phase of the truce, and has since announced that it will now only be willing to negotiate a ceasefire that includes the complete end to the war under Israel's terms, and it has listed 5 terms that Israel would be demanding. These include Hamas disarming in the Gaza Strip, the release of all hostages, living and dead, Gaza's complete demilitarization, i.e. also dismantling all other weaponry and weapons manufacturing capabilities in Gaza, Israel maintaining security control over the Gaza Strip, and a future civil administration in Gaza that is not run by Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. So, where did things end up this week and where do things stand? At the beginning of the previous week, a Hamas delegation that was led by Khalil al-Hayya arrived in Cairo, and Qatar and Egypt were reportedly attempting to present the group with a new proposed deal to try to restart negotiations. The situation continued to be stalled, and at the beginning of this week it was reported that Israel sent messages to the negotiating countries saying that they have to bring Hamas back to the table, or else Israel is going to launch its military invasion of Gaza City. On Monday of this week, U.S. President Trump added to this pressure, putting out a message stating that, quote, "We will only see the return of the remaining hostages when Hamas is confronted and destroyed," adding that the sooner this takes place, the better. Hours later, reports began to emerge that Hamas is meeting with the different Palestinian factions in order to debate this new proposal that was initiated by Qatar and Egypt, and several hours later on Monday, it was reported that Hamas is accepting this new proposal and even is actually accepting it without requesting any modifications, i.e. as far as the group is concerned, it can go forward with this new initiative. So, what do we know about this new proposal? The deal appears to rely somewhat on the original Witkoff proposal that was being negotiated in July, with compromises being made in most of those 4 controversial areas. Now, again, it's important to emphasize, there's been no official publication of this proposal. So, again, I emphasize what I'm saying here is drawn from leaks and statements from a variety of news sites, but it is not the official publication from the countries as to what Hamas has agreed to. Like the original Witkoff proposal, this new proposed deal reportedly includes a 60-day truce, 2 months, in the Gaza Strip, and the release of 10 live Israeli hostages and the return of the bodies of 18 hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip. With regards to the 4 points of controversy, Pertaining to Palestinian prisoners, reports differ somewhat about what the deal actually includes, but most agree that within this new proposal, in exchange for the live hostages, the 10 live hostages, Israel will release between 140 and 150 life-sentence Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails, and in exchange for the return of the 18 bodies, Israel would return 180 bodies of Palestinians that are held by Israel, and also would release all Palestinian women and children that are held in Israeli jails. It's important again to note that different leaks from different sites across the Middle East differed about the specifics of what Israel would release. The Israeli Ynet added that Israel would also release 60 Palestinian prisoners that are sentenced to over 15 years in Israeli prisons. Hamas's publication stated that 1,700 prisoners would be released. This possibly refers to all the women and children. Again, at this point, it is unclear how many prisoners will be released, but what is clear is that this is somewhat of a compromise between Hamas's original demand of 200 life sentence prisoners and Israel's original offer of 125. With regards to the idea of redeployment in the Gaza Strip, the proposal is rumored to offer a compromise, again, between Israel's demand that it would hold a 1,200-meter perimeter around the Gaza Strip and Hamas's demands for an 800-meter perimeter. According to leaks, the proposal that Hamas has accepted says that the IDF will take up positions along a 1,000-meter, 1 kilometer perimeter surrounding the Gaza Strip, with adjustments being made in the areas of Sajaiya and Beit Lahia, that is the northern regions of the Gaza Strip over here. Importantly, there were no consistency among the different sources regarding to what this means about the IDF's corridors in the Gaza Strip, the Magen Oz corridor, the Netzarim corridor, and the Morag corridor, or about the fact that the IDF has maintained the southern area of Rafah as a somewhat closed military zone. The Lebanese El Miadin did report that in this proposal the Rafah crossing would be open to traffic in both directions. Other sources stated that this is still being negotiated. At this point, it is unclear. With regards to the entrance of humanitarian aid, Hamas's publication stated that the deal includes the entrance of 600 aid trucks daily into the Gaza Strip, and the Saudi Al Hadath reported that this aid would be distributed solely by the United Nations, the Red Cross, and other private organizations, not the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. In a moment of analysis, I'll say this is one of the main points of controversy in the previous rounds, and at least in what has been stated, the current proposal leans much more towards what Hamas wanted, that the distribution will be only through the UN and different agencies, so it remains to be seen what the actual deal includes at the end. Finally, with regards to what has possibly been the largest sticking point in all the negotiation rounds until now, whether or not the first phase of the ceasefire will automatically lead to a complete ceasefire and an end to the war, or if fighting can resume. I will say, from looking at news sources emanating from Lebanon, Egypt, Qatar, Jordan, Israel, and Palestinian sources, almost none of them made any mention of this, whether the deal does include that the ceasefire will be automatically extended or whether it does not. The whole thing is being left very vague. I will say that on August 18th, one of Hamas's prominent figures, Taher Anunu, was quoted in the Qatari Al Arabi news site as stating that the proposal mentions U.S. guarantees for an end to the war. However, again, that's pretty much the only mention of this facet at this point. I will say I have no idea if this deal does relate to that or not, and what formula the different negotiating countries have managed to try to put forward, leading to Hamas accepting this. So with all this, what has Israel said in response to this new proposal? Immediately after Hamas gave its positive response, Israel began issuing statements that the country has not received this latest proposal yet, and also said that regardless of the latest rounds, Israel is adhering to its current position and to its stated terms. These statements continued on August 19th with the Israeli Prime Minister's office issuing repeated statements that Israel will only negotiate a deal for all the hostages, not for the release of 10 hostages, but for all the hostages, and a deal that includes its 5 stated terms. The Prime Minister's office also repeatedly published these terms. Again, this is one of the images that the office continuously put out. Again, stating that those terms are Hamas disarming, the release of all hostages, Gaza's demilitarization, Israel maintaining security control over Gaza, and the establishment of a civil administration that is neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. Despite this stalemate that continued for 3 days, on August 21st, Israel did announce that it is willing to send a delegation to the talks if there will be some sort of resuming of talks for negotiating a hostage deal. However, after that initial publication, it was somewhat backtracked, and it was stated in Israel that that delegation will only be negotiating Israel's stated demands and its 5 terms for ending the war. That is still where things stand at this point that I'm recording this. On August 23rd, it was reported that Qatar and Egypt have expressed grave frustration with the United States for not applying pressure on Israel to give a more positive answer to this framework. According to several different sources, Qatar and Egypt feel like they delivered the goods, so to speak, by bringing Hamas back to the table, and they're expecting the United States to now quote-unquote deliver the goods and bring Israel back to the table. From the side of the United States, the White House issued a statement on August 20th stating that Hamas only agreed to this framework due to President Trump's initial message. However, the United States has not related yet to the proposal specifically, leaving us currently in somewhat of a stalemate. At this point, it is likely that in the coming days we will see more pressure being mounted on Israel in order to possibly send at least a delegation to discuss this partial deal. Remains to be seen if Israel does accept that pressure or reject it and move forward with a military option, and a lot of this depends on the pressure from the United States. Before moving on from the hostage situation, however, another important development occurred this week on Friday. Speaking at the White House, U.S. President Trump was asked about the United States' continued support for Israel's expanded military operation in the Gaza Strip, and specifically about concerns that the Israeli hostages may be killed if such an offensive does move forward in Gaza. Responding, Trump discussed the hostage situation and also elaborated on his role in securing the release of hostages until now, before turning to talk about the remaining live hostages. When discussing them, the U.S. president stated that he knew that Hamas would not give up the remaining 20 live hostages easily, but then he added, quote, "Well, now maybe there's less than 20. Some of them maybe aren't around any longer," end quote. That statement triggered immediate rumors about the conditions of the hostages and if Trump may have information that some of the hostages have died in captivity. And it was somewhat reminiscent of what happened at the beginning of May of this year, when U.S. President Trump stated publicly that while there were 24 hostages considered alive, that number has been reduced to 21, and only several days later, Israel confirmed that 3 hostages had then been considered dead. In this case, however, on Friday, the Israeli government quickly issued a statement saying that the number of hostages who are known to be alive remains 20. The government said it has grave concerns due to the conditions of some of those hostages. However, it did not say it has grave concerns for their lives, which is usually the code for if Israel considers them dead. No explanation has been offered as to what Trump may have been referring to in saying that possibly less than 20 are alive. At this point, it is very unclear if Trump has any information, and if so, if that information came from Israel. Obviously remains to be seen. I'll report more about this if anything else emerges in the coming days. Turning to the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip, the bulk of the fighting over the past week centered on the southern parts of Gaza City, in the northern parts of Gaza Strip, and in the southern areas of Gaza Strip, in the areas of Han Yunis. In the northern parts of the Strip, the IDF continued to push into the Zaytun region of Gaza City, with the Israeli military reporting attacks targeting Hamas units operating outside the Al-Mamdani hospital in Zaytun region in Gaza City on August 17th. On that same day, the Al-Qassam brigades reported an ambush targeting IDF tanks with the Yasin 105 missiles in that region. And on August 18th, the Al-Quds brigades, that's the military wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, reported targeting IDF troops with mortars, and the Al-Qassam brigades of Hamas also reported detonating explosives targeting the Israeli military. Again, this is all in the areas of Zaytun, in the southern parts of Gaza City. Later in that day, it was reported that Israeli tanks are also making their way under the cover of airstrikes into the Sabra region of Gaza City. Again, that is another region, all in the southern parts of Gaza City here, in the northern parts of the Strip. And massive artillery fire was reported both in Sabra and in Zaytun in the following days. Meanwhile, in the southern parts of Gaza, both the Al-Qassam brigades and the Al-Quds brigades reported targeting IDF tanks, bulldozers, and troops gathering with mortars and anti-tank missiles on August 17th. And the Israeli military reported airstrikes targeting armed Hamas units operating in what is known as the Old Cemetery in Han Yunis on August 18th. And other bombings were also reported in the areas on August 19th and on August 20th. The most substantial event of the week in the Gaza Strip with regards to fighting occurred on August 20th in Khan Yunis, when the Al-Qassam brigades attempted to mount a combined attack and kidnapping operation of IDF troops. According to reports both by the IDF and by the Al-Qassam brigades, some 17 Hamas operatives used a tunnel that the IDF had previously destroyed but the group had managed to rebuild, and emerged some 40 to 50 meters from an IDF outpost in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. The attackers then divided into 4 units, firing anti-tank missiles and gunfire as they attempted to storm the outpost from different directions and carry out a kidnapping operation as well. These are some of the images that were disseminated by the IDF of the attack and of the attackers as they withdrew. 9 of the attackers were reportedly killed in the gun battles and IDF airstrike retaliations, while another 8 of them escaped back through the tunnels. 4 IDF soldiers were also injured in that attack, which the military later reported is indicative of the more daring operations that the Al-Qassam brigades are attempting to carry out lately, emphasizing that the group is taking advantage of the humanitarian pauses in the Gaza Strip in order to carry out such operations. In addition to these incidents, there were also massive airstrikes that were reported throughout the week in central Gaza, as well as a bombing that happened in the Al-Muwasi Humanitarian Zone in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, reportedly that happened on August 19th. There were also between 2 and 3 rockets that were fired from the Gaza Strip, targeting southern areas within Israel. These were either intercepted, or one of them ended up landing in the Gaza Strip itself. In total, the IDF reported that 1 soldier was killed during the past week as a result of the detonation of an IDF explosive, and 4 soldiers were injured, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 455, and 2,876 soldiers reported injured. The Palestinian Health Ministry in turn reported that 725 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip over the past week, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 62,622, and 157,673 Palestinians reported injured again since the war began. With regards to the numbers of Palestinians killed in Gaza, on August 21st, I'll also say that The Guardian put out a special report citing both IDF and Palestinian figures and analyzed the rate of civilians versus militant casualties that have occurred in the Gaza Strip. I'm not going to develop that here, but I will try to put out a special video about that analysis of The Guardian and how it managed to come up with its numbers and some of the methodological questions that have been raised. If you're interested in looking at that video, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you get an update on when I publish it. Before I conclude, I'm also going to add a few highlights with regards to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip over the past week. The substantial increase in the entrance of humanitarian aid into Gaza continued, which has included both aid paradropping missions, substantial increase in the amount of food trucks coming in, as well as humanitarian pauses in the fighting each day. Despite this, on August 20th, the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner stated that the amount of food that Israel is permitting to enter into the Gaza Strip is substantially lower than what is needed to avoid mass starvation, and the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza also reported that some 30 people died of malnutrition in the Gaza Strip over the past week, bringing the total number of people that have died of malnutrition in Gaza since the war began up to 281. In addition to this, a final highlight that I'm going to focus on is a statement that was made by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation from August 18th, which announced a new plan for food distribution in Gaza aimed at facilitating aid getting to more people. According to that plan, ID cards, including a picture and identification number, will be issued to people applying to receive aid from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which will allow people to reserve aid packages in advance that will be kept for them, rather than having to fight each time in order to reach the aid packages on time before the center either closes or it runs out of food. Now, in a moment of analysis, I'm going to say that it's important to understand the context regarding ID cards in the situation. When the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was initially introduced, its founders spoke about the option of such ID cards for Palestinians, with the aim of stopping aid from getting to Hamas members or their supporters because Palestinians would have to register in order to receive food packages. This came under heavy international condemnation at that time, with some citing the dangers that would be posed to Palestinians if they registered with such organizations, and others citing that it is considered a war crime to condition access to food based on IDs and such registration. As a result, since its initiation, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has operated with no ID checks or restrictions. Anyone could come and receive aid packages, theoretically, even more than once a day. With regards to the current plan that the Foundation is proposing, the Foundation did not indicate if this would become mandatory or simply would be an option for Palestinians to register, but it did state that all of the data would be kept confidential and will never be released, and that this will allow the Foundation to communicate with the population about changing times, specific deliveries, etc. The Foundation stated that a pilot began in the town of Rafah with some 350 people and was successful. Again, it has not made clear if this is going to become mandatory and when this will be rolled out. As part of Israel's upcoming military offensive, it has been rumored that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is going to open at least 10 more distribution sites in southern Gaza. Maybe this will be part of that. Obviously remains to be seen. We'll report more if anything comes out in the coming days. That concludes my latest highlight in the Israel-Palestine Report. If you find these informative, please do remember to send them on to anyone you think might be interested. Subscribe and hit that like button. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.